Welcome to the How HR Leaders Change the World podcast. I'm your host, Cecilia Crossley, and each week we explore how the work of HR leaders is also creating positive social change, contributing to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, goals which the world's companies are increasingly understanding the urgency of achieving and investing in the action required. If you'd like clear, actionable ideas for how you can use the power of your role to affect change in your company, you're in the right place. Following a corporate upbringing, I founded the social enterprise From Babies with Love. We provide services to HR leaders, and through this work, I realised that HR professionals and social entrepreneurs are working in the same areas, albeit in different ways. So we created this podcast to share knowledge on steps we can take through the work of HR. In my opinion, if you're an HR professional, you are also a change maker. And this podcast will provide you with examples of how. By sharing the successes of some of the world's most inspiring HR leaders, you can frame your work in the context of positive change, implement brilliant ideas, and feel absolutely wonderful about doing so. Welcome, Geoffrey Williams, Global Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Dr Martens, a brand which I'm sure all our listeners have a wonderful association with and a memory. I certainly do. Geoffrey, I read an article that you wrote which mentioned that you view the Dr Martens brand as one which represents strength, and that wearers of Dr Martens use their voice to change the world for the better, which I thought was brilliant and a lovely way to ask you to introduce yourself and your role at Dr Martens.
Thank you for having me. My name is obviously Geoffrey Williams. As you said, I head up Equity, Diversity and Inclusion at Dr Martens. I've been at the brand since September last year. Previously, I worked in other organisations heading up diversity, equity and inclusion. I'm also the co-founder of a non-profit called Rocking Your Teens that works with young people to think about how they manage their mental well-being, but also their career aspirations. And my role at Dr Martens is really to help the organisation set up our D&I strategy, to look at how we embed principles into our business practices, into our HR practices, but also how we model the best behaviour that we'd like society to see and embody as we move forward.
Brilliant. And that leads us wonderfully into the 5 questions that we ask on our How HR Leaders Change the World episodes. So if I may dive right in, the first question is, as an HR leader whose influence creates social change, what do you feel has been your most impactful action to date?
I think for me, it's been the encouraging people to have conversations and to own their own learning. Now, I think in the D&I space, we spend a lot of time trying to get everyone to understand how fair and equitable societies, fair and equitable businesses will enable us all to perform better, to feel better, to be happy. And I think the one thing I know I like to do is to encourage the leaders I'm working with and, the staff to really embrace their own personal learning and their own personal journeys, and encouraging them to, see when they make a shift, see when they make a mistake, and embrace that and not worry about it so much. Because I think, there's a lot of worry of, if I say something wrong, if I do something wrong, then it's all over. And it's, when you learn to walk as a child, you fall down and get back up. So I'm very much embracing of that opinion of, we fall down, you get back up, you dust yourself off, and you keep it moving.
Yeah, as a social entrepreneur, I think that's also, it's intrinsic in a way of working when you create something new or create change as well. So I'm with you on that completely, as hard as it can be sometimes, mind you. And if I was listening today and I thought, I loved what Geoffrey said and I want to go and create that in my work too, what would be 1 or 2 of your favourite ways of creating that change for your leadership and colleagues to help them feel comfortable in making mistakes and the learning that comes with that? What practical actions would you put on my to-do list?
I would put on your to-do list, some storytelling. So for you to go and learn about, great people in our society and the things that they've done and how they've learned. So I think reading Steve Jobs' book about his move from Apple to Pixar back to Apple is always, a fascinating story of how he, fell down, lost his business, got back up and kept going. I kind of always recommend reading Shoe Dog, which is the gentleman who founded Nike. and his journey and how just insanely, challenging it was, but then how he just kept moving forward with this vision that he wanted to bring wellness and health to, everybody on the globe. And I think as well, one of the stories that I read as a child or as a young person that inspired me was Malcolm X's autobiography. And I think that's a really powerful read because he goes from, being quite a nefarious individual to being very spiritual, to being really centered on, peace for, the African American community. But then he evolves and wants to have, peace for everybody. And I feel like that's such a powerful story. So I kind of always lean into storytelling. I also think it's that piece of kind of reflecting on yourself and the things that you've seen and things that you experience. So especially working in HR, there are instances where, you have to do certain things around, employee relations or talent management. And it's about creating those moments where you, as the individual being empowered to lead that stuff, gets to reflect and think, actually, am I managing this in the most equitable way? How could I change this process? Or how can I challenge those around me to be more embracive of diversity and inclusion? And then I think the third piece is really around, then elevating people coming behind you and making sure that, there are people that are able to step into your role and that you're okay with that as a leader and as an individual, that there's someone who's sitting there ready for you to move on. So I think a lot of time in leadership, everyone's kind of holding on to that mantle of power, and it's about letting that go and knowing actually there is someone that will be able to step in if I wasn't there tomorrow.
Brilliant. Thank you. And our second question, leading on from that, is thinking more broadly about the fashion industry. At the moment in that space, in that sector, what do you think is the most exciting opportunity for HR to change the world?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's helping the business to understand the multitude of individuals that could be working in the organization that then, also reflects our consumer base. I think it's looking at how they, manage the gender balance and have that conversation. Because I think when you look at retail overall, I've been doing that a lot since I've stepped into this role, there is a strong representation of women. But then as you move up, that seems to dissipate, like all organizations. But it's a lot more interesting to see that happen just based on the representation at the bottom. So I think it's like, making sure that we're able to really push and champion the conversation of gender. And when I say gender, I mean it in its broadest sense. So, yes, male and female, but also those that fall into the non-binary categories. And making sure that, as we look at our employee base, we're also thinking about how could our products embrace that mentality and that ideology. And I think it's also kind of pushing the conversation along, chivying it along slowly. So finding those moments, like I said previously, about the storytelling and bringing things in that impact the multitude of communities that exist. So, I've been doing a lot of research recently, and one of the things that truly fascinated me, but also depressed me, was that that effectively there is more fashion designed for dogs than there are for people living with disabilities.
Wow.
Now, obviously, every fashion brand out there is missing a trick, because we should be thinking about how we embrace those living with physical disabilities and how do we actually make sure that we are considering their experiences and having them be represented. So I think, HR plays a part in driving that agenda and bringing that to the forefront.
How HR Leaders Change the World is brought to you by From Babies with Love, and this episode is sponsored by our very own parental leave gift service. We help solve the challenge of connecting with colleagues across parental leave and in returning to work, contributing to talent retention and so too gender balance strategy. From Babies with Love donates 100% of its profits to orphaned and abandoned children. Your beautiful, sustainably sourced From Babies with Love gifts come with the story of how your company is also helping a less fortunate child, creating meaningful engagement. We transform spend that so often already takes place on flowers or products that don't have the Sustainable Development Goals at their heart. We transform that spend to become a consistent, inclusive and strategic part of your working parents programme. Ask us to tell you more at frombabieswithlove.org. Make an impact at a defining moment. Yeah, that is so interesting. And from Babies with Love, we make garments for babies and toddlers. And I must admit, I see the same thing, both with children with disabilities and also premature. And there is totally work to do there. You're absolutely right. And the relationship between employees and customers, representation in both groups and the connection between them is really interesting, especially the role that a fashion brand can play. And I was wondering if you feel optimistic and have seen any brilliant examples of how a brand and HR individuals within that brand have done some really great work in forwarding change and representation in a way that impacts employees and customers.
I'm trying to think now. It's a really great question. So I think, we are seeing that every day, that a lot of brands are thinking about their consumers and the representation within their organizations a lot more. I think, last year's Black Lives Matter conversation, I think that shifted the dial. I think, people are more aware now that we all need to do better as a society for everybody to make sure that we are seeing equal outcomes. So I think, when you look at brands now, you are seeing representation in their adverts. You are seeing, their leaders talking about what they learned at this moment, what they're going to do differently. People leaning into the uncomfortable experience of having to discuss something that they might have avoided all of their lives, even though we all knew and could see, how Black people were experiencing the world slightly different. We could all see it, but we could all choose to ignore it if we wanted to. And I think, after last year's conversations and the pledges and commitments people have made, we are seeing a shift in, what's on our screens, people kind of leaning into the next generation of designers and giving them platforms and spaces and investment to, really bring their visions to life. So there's a multitude. I think there's too many for me to name. I have seen loads out there. But I think it's that piece of being consistent and continuing it and not just doing it for this year because, it's the in vogue thing to do. I think it's making sure that, you see this definitely as a value add. And I think, a simple statistic, again, to throw at everybody is, I think it was 1 in 5 students coming out of university by I'm probably getting the stat completely wrong, by 2025 will be of ethnic minority background in London. So effectively, the representation numbers are going to go up quite significantly for those that are, identifying as a person of colour. And I think that's something that, we all need to think about, that, there are transitions happening where as you continue to do this work and have these conversations, these individuals are going to demand more of us than we're probably at the moment capable to deliver.
Yeah, it's brilliant to hear that you feel that you've seen a change in terms of the content that's on your screens. As you say, keeping the momentum is the challenge next. Question 3 is, which I'm really excited to ask you because I think I know what you might talk about, or I might lead you in that direction. So let me ask the question. Which particular areas of social or environmental injustice are you passionate about and see that your role gives you the chance to create change? And the reason I mentioned I was excited to hear your thoughts on this question was because I was thinking you might talk about rocking your teens and perhaps any relationship that your work for rocking your teens, how your role at Dr Martens might also be helping you in driving rocking for your teens. But I don't mean to put words in your mouth, Geoffrey. So let me leave you with the question.
So yes, to your point, I guess the area that I'm most passionate about is the next generation. I think the reason why Rocking Your Teens started, I'll start there, is because the co-founders, myself, Jenny Garrett, and Sandy Paris, as we came together and we saw that there was a gap in the conversation for young people around not only work and what work meant, but also managing your mental well-being. There are so many challenges that the next generation are facing in the form of social media, in the form of bullying, and it's bullying in a very different way than you and I might have experienced, if we're being honest. It's the conversation of everyone saying, oh, you need to know what you want to do and you have to have 11 A stars at GCSE and 5 A levels at A, and because otherwise you'll never do anything in life. And there's just a lot of pressure and a lot of kind of looking at other people going on. And we really wanted to bring the conversation back to them, center them in the piece of there's something, you are enough, and the only gift that you have to give to everybody is yourself. And once you understand that, you will be a lot more powerful. So I'm very much passionate about the next generation, so excited about the last 5 years and all the things that we've done within Rocking Your Teens. I think that, working for a brand like Dr. Martens, it's an opportunity to really be speaking to, our next set of consumers. Not that I'm going to be advertising to them because, I'm not allowed to do that. But it's that piece of really being able to understand what they want and need and be able to bring that back to my day job. As I think about D&I within Dr. Martens and I'm thinking about our consumers, I kind of have a linchpin in to speak to some of our consumers and understand their experiences. I think it's also possibly using, the DM's brand to, impact the next generation in the same way that Rocking Your Teens currently is, in the sense of giving them the voice and the power to step into their true identities, which I think is so important and such a invaluable lesson that I think sometimes acquire in your 30s. Not everybody, but some people get to that point in their 30s that they're like, something, I can only be me, and if that doesn't work for everybody, so be it. I would just keep trucking. So yeah, I think that's my answer to your question.
Brilliant. And just for the benefit of everybody listening, just briefly describe what Rocking Your Teens does, if that's all right, Geoffrey.
Yeah, sure.
The activities of the organisation. Yeah.
Rocking Your Teens is a social enterprise set up 5 years ago. So 2012, I'm doing my maths right. And effectively, we were set up to create conferences initially, where we would bring together a group of boys and a group of girls on 2 separate days and effectively introduce them to the world of work, but also into coping strategies around mental health. So that would be having different speakers speak about their experiences, how they managed, going for their GCSEs and their A-levels and the stress that came with it. But also kind of, telling everyone, if you want to work in fashion or media or financial services or a lawyer, or you want to be an entrepreneur, these are the things that you need to consider. In the wake of COVID, we've gone very much online like every other organization, and we're currently still offer our day conferences. So last week, we did our International Women's Day events and had over 300 young ladies attend. But we'll also be offering 60-minute webinars, which is basically, again, rocking your role, and we'll have different organizations talking about how you rock a role in science, in retail, in technology, whatever it might be. So that's kind of what Rocking Your Teens currently does.
Brilliant, thank you. And it was lovely to hear before that you described how your work at Dr. Martens, there's a connection between that and your work at Rocking Your Teens. And I'm sure it goes both ways, the learnings that you bring from each role that you have in each organisation. And it leads us on really nicely to question 4, which is it's about equity and inclusion. And because of your role, we've spoken about this, of course, in the other questions. And I'd love to hear from you your thoughts on a challenge that I think many people face in terms of sometimes being asked to present the business case. And this question is about how you use your position to bring about a more equitable and inclusive environment in ways that deliver Dr. Martens' business goals. And we ask this question so that if anybody listening is ever given that, okay, can I have the business case for a piece of work that has the purpose of creating improved equity and inclusion, ways that can help them formulate that business case and get the sign-off or get the budget or whatever it is that is needed. Is there perhaps an example you could share, a piece of work that you did that you were able to clearly demonstrate the contribution to the business objectives?
Yeah. So funnily enough, I'm quite new at my time at Dr. Martens, so I'm not going to talk about Dr. Martens in that regard, but I will say this. I haven't had to define the business case in the same way that I have done in previous organizations. I was hired into the role because they know they needed this role and they wanted to do the work. So I'm in a very fortunate position at the moment where I'm just kind of getting on with lots of exciting things. I think, in the previous organizations that I've worked for, the business case conversation came up a lot, and it wasn't necessarily from the top of the organization. It was often from middle management who are having conversations, I guess, twofold. So they're having stuff coming in from the leadership that lands on their plate, but also the people that report into them. So sometimes they're kind of like stuck in this news sandwich where they're unable to move forward sometimes. And then, I rock up and say, for all of our, jobs that we're going to hire in the next year and a half, I want to see a diverse slate. And you now need to go to the broadest possible market to find individuals. So they're going to ask the question of, why is this an imperative? Why do I need to now spend an extra, 4 hours looking for a role when I know I could go and hire my friends from another organization, or I could just reach out to my network and someone would hand me, someone with some capabilities that I could just lean into. And for me, the conversation has always been, something? Innovation comes from doing this work well. So when you have a team that has high trust, high performance, but also they're able to kind of work on complex challenges and debate and come up with solutions, that is what we're all working towards. So as you build that team and have that diversity, yes, it might be challenging, but yes, it's also that piece of bringing all these different skills and insights from a multitude of people, and effectively having that multitude of people means that they might not all look the same, might not all think the same, didn't all go to the same school, didn't all get taught by the same teachers. They're bringing in these different experiences to drive our business agenda. So our business case here is, how do we further the agenda of the organization, remain profitable, and in all honesty, keep our jobs, because that's what it's all about. So I've kind of always driven down that route of bringing people together builds brilliance. I think it's also those moments where you can share the example of, what your competitors are doing, but also where people have got it wrong. So, now having moved into a more kind of commercial fashion brand, is those moments of looking at, where organizations have not fact checked and or lent into the fact that there's so many people that could be buying their brands, and they've done things that have a negative impact in their marketing and in their branding, and then the impact on their share price, the impact on their reputation. And I think those are the moments again where you're talking about the business case and bringing that to life for people and really pushing that agenda. Also, I think, now if we're still having to define the business case to somebody, you need to tell them that they need to stop being a laggard and come into the 21st century, because this is an imperative. This is not something that you can hope will go away, put your head in the sand, because it's everywhere. Every week we are having conversations about inclusion, about equity, about representation, about diversity, in so many ways. Yes, they're very sad and negative things that are going on in the news right now that impact us all, but also in our schools, in our, universities, in those institutions, these young people are talking about these conversations and want the organizations they work for to truly embody that. And I think, if you want the brightest and the best, you need to embody that sooner than later.
Those were really helpful tips for anybody who is still having to, dare I say, work with any laggards on demonstrating a business case. I know, in reality, I know it is a hurdle. No, I love it, but I know it does still come up, doesn't it? I think we all working in the framework that we're in.
Yeah.
And there is.
I know it does, but I think it's that piece. Sorry, I was going to say I know it does, but I think it's that piece of, in effect, if you want your organization to still be here in 5 years' time, you need to embrace diversity. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be suddenly you're going out and hiring lots of different people. It's just that piece of understanding how it impacts your organization and where the value is to your business, and how you go about creating those spaces for your people to innovate and to learn from each other and to embrace the insights that we all bring to our day job. So yeah, sorry, I'm going to stop talking.
No, it's brilliant.
I'm very passionate about this one.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear. It really is, Geoffrey. Okay, so our final question now is one where we really love to get specific. We love to be able to give the listeners something that they can think about and think, yeah, I can literally put that on my to-do list next week. I'm going to go and do that, take that action that Geoffrey said. So the question is, what is one specific action you would like to see all HR leaders take to make a more positive change in the world?
One action.
Yeah, tough choice for you here, Geoffrey.
Yeah, tough choice. Do you know something? I think the one thing that I would say HR leaders, HR individuals need to do is to truly listen to their people. And I think, and I mean their people in the sense of the multitude of individuals that work in the business. I think over the years, as I've been in the HR space and been a part of many employee engagement surveys and lots of other bits and pieces. I think the bit that we always miss out on is how do we dig into those narratives of the individuals that are not in the 5 identities that we could see. So, that you do a survey and effectively if it's under 5 people in the team, you don't see their results. And I think it's how do we dig into those 5 individuals to really understand their experience, because their experiences might be the ones that are different to everybody else's. And then they're the ones that are actually effectively the changes we need to make. And I think sometimes we miss that. So I would say when you're looking at data, looking at the experience of those that work in your business, don't look at the majority, try and look at the minority.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Geoffrey. That was absolutely fascinating. It's wonderful to hear your passion. I know we could talk for a lot longer, but this episode is coming to an end. But I hope that everybody's enjoyed listening. And thank you again for coming on How HR Leaders Change the World.
Thank you so much for having me. And can I just do one final plug for Rocking Your Teens, which is spelled Rocking, ROCKING. Your, spelled very inappropriately, UR, Teens, TEENS. And we're all on all platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and obviously our website as well. So do come and check us out and pose any questions to myself.
I am all for plugging for social enterprises, and I think it's very sweet that you chose to plug Rocking Your Teens and not Dr Martens just then, but both wonderful brands.
Everyone knows Dr Martens.
Thank you again, Geoffrey.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of How HR Leaders Change the World. Thank you for tuning in. If you have a moment to leave a review, a 5-star one please, that would be a huge help to achieving our goal to reach more of your peers, so we can all contribute to further and faster positive change. For your copy of the show notes, head to frombabieswithlove.org, where you can also join the How HR Leaders Change the World mailing list, and make sure you don't miss out on future episodes and bonus materials. And for harnessing the power of your role to create positive social change, I'm sending you a jumping up in the air virtual high five. See you next time on How HR Leaders Change the World.